This video is all about Visual Studio Code for developing in .NET and C#. So I want to take the time and create this video because I've been getting a lot of questions about my environment, my setup, my extensions, and I really want you to follow along if you're watching my videos. I was hoping I could just link another video that explains how to do this stuff, since I couldn't find a single video that explains how to set up Visual Studio for .NET with awesome extensions and give you a full IDE-like experience inside the Visual Studio Code editor. Then I decided to take the time and create something which should be enough for you to be able to follow my series and just have a great experience when working with Visual Studio Code.
Hi everyone, Amichai here. I do have a quick disclaimer if you're new to the channel. So I am a Microsoft employee and these are Microsoft technologies that we're talking about, but I'm not talking on behalf of Microsoft. These are my personal opinions.
Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I want actually is to create here a folder, let's call it docs. And in here, let's just call it vscode playground.markdown. And here I'll just paste in what we're going to be doing today. So I paste it and I'm opening it in the Markdown Preview Enhanced extension, which we'll look into later on in this video. So there are three parts to the video today. The first one is just getting to know the different files that are created by the editor, then some settings to make our life easier, and finally extensions, things that I would recommend adding without thinking twice, just to give you the IDE-like experience, and also some really cool extensions that many people don't know about, or that specifically in the .NET community, I haven't seen them used. So I really hope that you'll be able to add some of these tools to your toolkit. The only thing that you need to follow along up until this point is to have the .NET SDK installed in Visual Studio Code. Now let's create a new console application. So .NET new console. And as expected, this creates the program CS and the CS proj and some other folders over here, which we don't care about at the moment. And in here we have our hello world. So if we go ahead and run the project, then as we expect, we get hello world. Now, if we try to put a breakpoint over here and run it again, then we don't hit the breakpoint, and that's because we are running it from the command line and not through Visual Studio Code. If we want to actually run, debug, navigate to definition, find all references, and so on, so you're going to want to go over here to the extensions tab and look for C#, right, and add this extension over here. Okay, so once you have that added, now we can go ahead and run our program. Let's go to the Run and Debug tab over here and try to run our project. So when creating the project, you probably had a little notification over here that said, add missing assets, blah, blah, blah. If you clicked it, then great. If not, then you have this over here that you can click. And what it does is it creates some files that are needed to build, debug, and launch our application. I actually want to show you what's created. So we'll go over here, and there's another way to create it by clicking Control-Shift-P. This opens all the commands that you can run, and we're going to go and run the first one over here, generate assets for build and debug. So click that, and you can see that it created here the VS Code folder, which inside has launch.json and task.json. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the launch.json. And going back to the run and debug, you can see that now we have this play button. So you can see that this drop-down list is populated by this name over here and this name over here, right? So it corresponds to this and this. And let's look at the first one. So the first one over here, what it does is it launches this DLL over here, which is the DLL that's created when we build our application. And we can pass here arguments to the main method, and it uses the internal console, unlike Visual Studio, where it uses an external console. Okay, but this is configurable and you can change it to something else. Okay, now this one over here, this allows you to attach the Visual Studio Code debugger to a running instance of a .NET application, and we're going to look into that a bit later. Okay, but for now, I actually want to talk about this property over here, the pre-launch task. So I want to open side by side the other file that was created, the tasks.json. Okay, so let's split the screen and open the tasks.json on the other side. And let me just make this a bit bigger so we can see. So we have the pre-launch task, which corresponds to this task over here. And you can see it's the same label here and here. And basically what it does is it runs .NET build and it specifies which project to build. Okay, now this makes sense that before you can run the DLL that's specified over here, you have to first generate that DLL So this is why this is the pre-launch task. Okay, and you can see that we out of the box get here two other tasks as well. So this one will do .NET publish and will publish our project. And the last one, this one will run .NET watch run, and it specifies which project. Okay, now as you would expect, you can go ahead and add here more tasks. So if, for example, you want to create a task that runs the tests that you have in your project, then you could say here test, have this run .NET test, and specify the project. But you could also have tasks that depend on other tasks. So for example, let's copy and paste this over here, and let's get rid of all of this, and let's give it the label, I don't know, make sure everything is okay. And you can have this task depend on other tasks. So for example, the build and the test tasks. And now when we specify this label over here, then you'll run both the build and the test tasks. Okay, so now that we know what these two files do, let's go ahead and try to actually run our application. So we have a breakpoint over here. Let's just make this a bit more interesting. So let's say var message equals and hello world, and print the message. Go to the run and debug and click play, or you can just click F5. Okay, we hit the breakpoint, and as you would expect, then you can hover over the message and see the content of the variable. And there are a few other stuff here that we'll look into in our second example. Okay, so for now, let's stop the project. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I have these two folders over here, which I don't really care about. So let's go to the settings and look for hide files. And under here, files exclude, you can specify which files you want to hide. So in our case, we want to hide the bin folder and the object folder. Okay, now for me, I have a couple of other patterns that I added just to get rid of everything that's not my actual code that I care about. Okay, so this is actually the list that I have. So it includes also some stuff of Visual Studio. So in case this project was created in Visual Studio and I'm just opening it in Visual Studio Code, and some other stuff that are generated that I don't really care about. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, I actually want to get rid of everything and demonstrate how we can attach the debugger to a running .NET application. So let's create here a new Web API project. And if you're not familiar with this, then all it is a single endpoint that allows you to query the weather forecast. So it's available under host/weather forecast, and it returns 5 random weather forecasts. Okay, so let's say we have this application and it's running externally. So .NET run, so it's not running inside Visual Studio Code, so the debugger isn't attached. Okay, and I want to hit the breakpoint over here. So what I can do is, and we're going to look into this extension soon. First, let's create here a folder. Let's call it requests. And in here, let's create weather. And let's create a get weather request. Now we're going to look into this extension in the extension part of this video. So for now, just bear with me. So we have our host / weather forecast. Let's paste it over here. Let's make a request. And now the request is sent successfully, but we didn't hit the breakpoint. What we want to do is attach the debugger. So how do we do that? We go over here to the run and debug. Okay, now again, we still don't have the launch JSON and the task JSON. So let's click this, which created the two files that we care about. Let's click .NET Core attach and play. Okay, now we need to specify which application we want to attach to. So in our case, it's the VS Code playground. So we click this, and now the debugger is attached. We can make a request again and hit the breakpoint. Okay, so here we have a few other things that we can demonstrate. Over here on the left, we have our local variables. So everything that you would expect from a full-blown IDE you have here, and you can go ahead and look inside. And if you're used to using the immediate window in Visual Studio, so over here in the debug console, you can do similar things like evaluate expressions. So for example, daytime now, or just a random string. And of course, you can take the local variables and evaluate them over here. If we have the, I don't know, HTTP context. So let's go ahead and write HTTP context. And this evaluates and outputs the value of this variable. And you can also, of course, go to nested properties. So for example, features, and you'll get something further inside. Now, unlike Visual Studio, there is no Intellisense here, and it doesn't suggest how to complete the word that you're trying to type. So what you can do is actually go over here on the left, and for example, you want to evaluate, I don't know, in the request, you have the host. So instead of typing the entire path to this variable, you can right-click, click copy as expression, and this will actually copy the path to this variable. And now you can paste it over here, click enter, and get the value. And if you're used to some tricks like no quotes, so you can do it here as well, just comma and Q, and they'll get rid of the quotes, and so on. Hey, what else do we have here that we care about? You can see all the threads that are running and the call stack of each one of the threads. So this one over here is where we're paused, but we can actually go to the main thread, click it, and you can see that the main thread is over here, and the variables are the variables of this scope. Great. The last thing that we care about over here, so you can see all the breakpoints that you have in your application. So here, for example, you can see that we have a breakpoint in the weather forecast.cs file on line 24. So if we add more breakpoints, you can see them over here. You can unselect them so you won't hit the breakpoint. And there are some other options, which I'm not going to go into. Okay, so back to the breakpoint that we stopped on. So we have all the regular options like step over, step into, and so on. If we want to disconnect the debugger that we attached, then we can click this over here or shift F5. For now, let's just remove the breakpoint, click continue, and we see that we get our response. Okay, so let's disconnect the debugger and stop the program and move on to the next part of this video. One of the things that I really like about Visual Studio Code is the option to configure almost any shortcut that you can imagine. I really like being able, using only the keyboard, to move from this screen over here over to the file explorer over here, or to the terminal and back and forth, or creating new terminals one next to each other and so on. So we're going to look into how you can do that. So over here, if you go Control-Shift-P to show all the commands, and over here in the keyboard shortcuts, you can see all the shortcuts that you can configure. So for example, if you want to split the terminal, then just write split terminal, and here you can see the option to split the terminal or to unsplit the terminal, and you can see that I configured these to be my custom shortcut. So I wanted it to match my experience in the Windows terminal. So that's why I changed it to be like this. And just to demonstrate what you can do, I'm over here in the editor. So by default, Control-Shift-E takes you to the Explorer. Now I'm using the Vim extension. So for me, using J and K takes me up and down the files. And I can just select whatever I want by clicking enter. And I'm back over here. If I want to go to the terminal, then I have configured this to be Control-Shift-J. Takes me down to the terminal, and I can type here. To split the terminal, I've defined it to be Alt-Shift equals, which matches the configuration in the Windows terminal. So it splits it to 2. And I've defined going back and forth between the two terminals by Control-K and J. So that takes me from one to the other. And if I want to go back to the editor, then for me, it's Control-Shift-K. And all of this is customizable. So for me, I can split the screen, jump back and forth between these two windows, go over here, open whatever files. It's just, I wasn't able to match this experience in any other IDE. And I really wanted to give Rider a shot, but I wasn't able to match this experience when it comes to keyboard shortcuts. So I really recommend for you to take a look at the keyboard shortcuts. And you can also specify when you want this keyboard shortcut to be enabled. If while watching this, you saw something on the screen that didn't make sense to you, then feel free to put the timestamp and ask me what I did, and I'll tell you which extension or which shortcut it was, so you can also configure it in your Visual Studio Code. Okay, now I want to talk about the different extensions that I would recommend if you're developing in .NET. So to create an IDE-like experience inside Visual Studio Code, there are some extensions that I would download without thinking twice. So these give you functionality that you don't really care if it comes from the main C# extension or from an extension that does specifically this. So let's go through them. The first one I would recommend is Roslynator. So this extension over here has over 500 analyzers that will give you smart insights and help you enforce rules that you want in your application. Okay, now this is highly configurable. So clicking Control-Shift-P and opening the Roslynator config, over here you can enable things globally. And if there's a specific rule or convention that you don't agree with, for me, I have customized many rules over here, then you can just go ahead, find the specific rule that you want and disable it. It's very convenient. Okay, next, there's the .NET Core Test Explorer. So if you have any tests in your project, then this makes it very convenient to find the tests, run the tests, see what passes, what fails, and so on. So this is also a no-brainer. Next, there's the auto usings for C#. Now, what this allows you to do is when writing a symbol, then it shows you options from different namespaces. Then you can just click tab and it adds the using statement for you so you don't have to add it yourself. So this is a great extension, also a no-brainer. Next, there's C# namespace autocomplete. This one over here, where it basically suggests the entire namespace for you to fill, or I use it actually a lot with this over here. So you just choose namespace fill and it fills the namespace according to the folder structure. Okay, next we have the C# XML Documentation Comments. This basically, when you type 3 slashes, then it creates the entire documentation as you have in IDEs. So you have also the parameters and also the summary over here. Also no brainer. Next, this is one that I use all the time. It's the NuGet reverse package search. And what this allows you to do is basically select any symbol, then click Control-Shift-P, choose NuGet reverse package search, and it tells you which package that symbol belongs to. All right, so pretty cool. I use this all the time, very convenient. So thank you, Jess Chadwick, for creating this. Okay, now stuff that aren't related specifically for .NET, but also I would add this without thinking twice. So there's the code spell checker, which, as you would expect, is a spell checker. Next, there's the vscode-icons. So this one I would add as well. So by default, this is what it looks like. So after you install this, you can choose the vscode-icons theme. And when you click this, then you basically have all the icons for all the files. And it's just a nice thing to have. Next, there's Path Intellisense. This one over here, which when you're trying to write a path, then it auto-completes the available paths like so. Last but not least, it's the EditorConfig for VS Code. This one over here, which also, if you're working with EditorConfig, then I would add without thinking twice. Okay, next, I want to talk about really awesome extensions that make Visual Studio Code like no other editor. So, first of all, let's start with the SQL Server. So this one over here, and it allows you, believe it or not, to connect to your database from within Visual Studio Code. So let's go ahead and open it and see what this looks like. So over here, I have my databases. And as you would expect, you can see all the databases that are configured. You can see the tables that they have and so on. And you can also run queries. So for example, select top 1000 and it creates this query and runs it for you. So I really like this one and the way it's integrated inside the editor. Next, the one and only GitHub Copilot. So if you aren't, let me just close this over here. If you aren't using GitHub Copilot yet, then I would definitely recommend to join the waitlist and use it. It's just incredible. If you've been following my series, then you saw how much time it could save you when developing. Next, we have one of my favorite extensions, the REST client extension. So this allows you to send HTTP requests from within Visual Studio Code. So what we did before. So we created over here the get weather request, and it supports cool things like creating variables. So I can say, for example, I have the host variable and it's equal to this thing over here. And I can replace this with the host. But actually, a more practical example is you might have different environments. So you can go to the settings, and that's by clicking Control and comma. And over here, search for REST environment. Okay, and this setting over here. Now you see that there are two options in the settings. There's the user and the workspace. So anything I configure for the user will be used in any application that I create. And if I do it in the workspace, then it is applied only for this project over here. So it makes sense that my host for each project will be different. So that's why I'm going to select workspace. And let's open the settings. And over here, we can create different environments. So I can have, for example, in my dev environment, I can have one host. And in my product environment, then I can have a different host. So what does this look like? Let's copy this value over here and paste it here. Now let's imagine there's something else for the other environment. And here I can put stuff that are shared for everyone. So for example, I can have here, let's say, the route that is the weather forecast. Now that I have this configured as part of my environment variables, then I can get rid of this and use it over here. But before I do, I need to specify the environment that I want to work in. So Control-Shift-P and write environment. And here I have the option to switch environments for the REST client. So let's click this. And here I have the options that I configured in the file before. Let's choose dev, for example. So now that we have that, I can go ahead and start typing route. And you can see that it's recognized there's Intellisense. I can click tab and it adds it to the route. And I can still make the request like I did before. So let's just make sure that this works. So let's run the project again, make a request, and you can see that it worked like before. Now, there are many other features in this extension. I obviously can't go into all of them, but this is just something cool that I wanted to demonstrate. Next, there's GitLens. So everyone's working with Git. Definitely recommend this. Super cool. Has so many features. No brainer, in my opinion. Next, VS Browser. This one over here allows you to open a browser inside Visual Studio Code. So for me, I have it defined to open in droplab.io. And what's cool is that I can take whatever code I want, copy it, and paste it over here without leaving Visual Studio Code. Next, let me just close all the clutter over here. This is a nice to have extension. So highlight trailing white spaces. Okay, so this is an extension that does exactly what it says it's going to do. Does it well. Next, we have the jwt-decoder, this one over here, which allows you to decode JWT tokens and see their decoded value. So it's nice if you work with JWT tokens. Next, there's a couple of extensions if you're working with Markdown, I would recommend. So it's these three: Markdown All in one, Markdown Preview Enhanced, and markdownlint. Okay, so this is how we previewed the file in the beginning of this video, and this helps you with some style checks in your Markdown files. So I would recommend 3 of these. Then there's some other stuff like Docker, which if you work with Docker, then you should definitely look into it. And this deserves an entire series, and I definitely will create a series on Vim, because this is another cult like Visual Studio Code, which I would recommend for you to join. So if this seems like a lot of work for you, then don't worry. You only need to define this once and then turn on the settings sync, and it will be synced anywhere. So you just download Visual Studio Code, sign in, and you'll have all your configurations. So I have here a GitHub repository open. I'm clicking the dot button to open Visual Studio Code in the web. And if I open the settings and we go to hide files like we did before, then you can see we still have here all the configurations that I configured specifically for me. So that's it for this video. I know it was a bit of a high pace running through all the extensions. I hope it wasn't too fast, but I want you to be able to download all the extensions and follow along in my other videos, because it's really important to do the things yourself when trying to learn a new topic. So that's why I took the time to create this video. So I hope you found some good extensions to add to your toolkit, and you're a step closer to convert to the Visual Studio Code religion from whatever IDE you're currently using. Okay, so that's it, and see you in the next one.